Hi, welcome to this presentation. After a brief introduction and a look at the methodology, I will discuss how non-human animals make meaning and put this into context of care. Finally, I will talk about the connections between care, language, and resonance. Before getting started, a little about myself. My name is Sabine Winter, and I'm a third-year PhD student at the University of Texas at Dallas. I've been working in education since earning my master's degree from the University of North Texas. I am also a human companion to our dogs, horses, and cats, listed not in order of importance. The theme of this conference is resonance, which, according to the conference's call for proposals, refers to our ability to form deep, meaningful connections that provoke thoughts, evoke emotions, and stimulate the senses through personal images and memories, often drawing on an individual or community's lived experiences. When communicated, these individual and community experiences require a medium, usually a common language. However, in the absence of a common spoken language, nonverbal communication can be utilized to convey meaning. This latter form can commonly be found in communication between human and non-human animals. And that is what this presentation explores, focusing on canine and equine companions to answer the question how care impacts interspecies communication and what role resonance plays. Here are the two key hypotheses. Considering care as a language and a medium repositions it as a form of communication rather than an activity, and disentangling verbal and nonverbal communication of care allows for a more in-depth understanding of resonance. As far as methodology goes, the information presented here relies on textual evidence, which includes examples with a few personal examples added. The focus on canines and equines is due to the partnerships humans have had with these species and how this relationship has changed in our recent history. As many pet owners will attest to, communication takes place between human and animal companions, which involves meaning making. No concrete definition exists for meaning making, according to 𝗰𝘁 and et al., but there is consensus that there needs to be some predictability to the actions, which implies intentionality. The authors compare human and non-human process by illustrating two typical situations. This chart is based on two depictions from the 𝗰𝘁 article that demonstrate the creation of meaning. One illustrates human meaning making and the other non-human meaning making using what looked like marmots. The first row shows the human process. A shopkeeper may feel thirsty all of a sudden and, realizing the shopkeeper sells water bottles, asks for a bottle of water. The shopkeeper, processing the information, realizes the shopper is thirsty, though they do not state this aloud, and offer to sell a bottle of water. Both the shopper and the shopkeeper achieve their goal, the former quenching her thirst and the latter making a sale. Put into more abstract terms, interactant A feels a need and acts upon an external signal, which causes interactant B to establish and act upon a resultant meaning. The ensuing actions result in mutualistic meaning. While non-human animals do not partake in capitalist processes, they do engage in meaning making, as shown in the second row. Marmot A all of a sudden feels scared and, upon spotting a raptor in the sky, decides to warn other nearby marmots. Marmot B, hearing the warning signal, realizes Marmot A is scared and acts by running away. Marmot A, seeing this, feels relief, according to this chart, and also probably runs away. They both now have fled to safety, and one warned the other. So again, put into more abstract terms, Marmot A feels a need and acts upon an external signal, which causes Marmot B to establish and act upon a resultant meaning. The ensuing actions result in mutualistic meaning. This meaning-making process also demonstrates intra-species communication. Let's return to the previous slide for a moment. Different fields have different studies in this area, have conducted different studies in this area, but collaboration between fields are relatively new. So Berths et al. In recognizing discipline-specific differences, particularly between linguists and biologists, developed a primer for animal linguistics to foster mutual understanding. They distinguish between semantic denotation and pragmatics. Semantic denotations refer to signals that, within the species, create a universally understood meaning. An example might be a grazing horse raising its head abruptly. Other members of the herd will take note and look up as well, as this action indicates the potential for a threat. This behavior is universal for equines, both wild and domestic, and a new herd member would understand this behavior meant to signal the potential of a threat. Pragmatics, on the other hand, are contextual, meaning further interpretation is needed based on the situation. For example, a horse stomping its feet can mean more than one thing. It could signal annoyance and a threat to kick if unwarranted behaviors continue, such as a mare would raise a leg and stomp if a stallion were to make unwelcome advances. However, raising and stomping a leg might also signal the discouragement or displacement of a pesky insect, which might not require others in the herd to act at all or could serve as an early alert. The leg stomping then requires further investigation. A stallion that misses the sign might be sorry, and whereas another action like stomping for the insect might not be at all bad. Let's return one more time to the previous slide. So the examples introduced thus far discuss intra-species meaning-making processes, but interspecies processes require further mental processes to translate signals. Two other studies look at interspecies communication, specifically the non-human's ability to discern human signals and whether personality traits play a role. It's been established that some especially gifted dogs, especially border collies, and even then rare, have a very large vocabulary. For example, Chaser, who's not pictured here, this is just a placeholder for Chaser, in 2011 held the record for knowing 1,022 nouns. In the context of interspecies communication, Fugasa and others studied whether playfulness is an indicator of enhanced problem-solving capabilities. And similarly, Christensen and others investigated whether curiosity is a marker for enhanced learning capabilities, as it is for humans and primates. Fugasa and others asked dog owners of 3 different test groups to complete the dog personality questionnaire about their dogs. So the first group consisted of gifted dogs, the second one Hungarian dogs, and the third Austrian dogs. Playfulness was the only personality trait found to be more prevalent in the group of gifted dogs, though the authors also point out that the owners of those dogs interacted with them extensively starting at an early age, suggesting socialization might also impact those findings. Christensen's and others studied learning performance in young horses. The study exposed horses growing up in the same environment to positive and negative reinforcement to measure learning performance, and they found that curiosity may indicate a positive relationship with learning performance. Like Fugasa and others, they pointed out that positive socialization practices may impact an equine's level of curiosity. These findings are relevant as non-human animals who exhibit negative behaviors are less likely to become cherished companions. For dogs, this may mean being surrendered or euthanized, and for equines, this might mean entering the auction circuit, which puts them at risk for ending up in the slaughter pipeline or being euthanized. And that demonstrates that effective interspecies communication between human and non-human companions is integral to their relationship and well-being. Let's next look at how meaning making and care intersect. Socialization that results in positive interspecies relationships implies an element of care, an integral part of feminist studies. Joan Tronto explores the care extensively in her book Moral Boundaries. She positions care as political and establishes 4 phases of care, which we will look at in a moment. Maria Puig de la Casa expands Tronto's reasoning to include non-human entities as well. Both address the exploitative and thus political side of care, and Bella Casa emphasizes the need for care in what she calls interdependent worlds. Care is an essential element of Donna Caraway's situated knowledge and Harding's standpoint epistemology. Both advocate for the inclusion of marginalized viewpoints to create a more nuanced and comprehensive understanding to create situated knowledge. Care is needed both in providing room for the additional narratives and when listening and implementing change. While care at a global level is essential, it is also present in interpersonal relationships. As mentioned earlier, Tronto introduces the 4 phases of care, which are caring about, taking care of, caregiving, and care receiving. Caring about means to become aware of a need for care, which does not require much personal involvement. Taking care of refers to indirect involvement, such as making a donation. Caregiving means to provide hands-on care, and care receiving being the recipient of care. This latter function of care receiving also includes feedback from the care receiver to the caregiver, which must be taken into consideration for caregiving to be successful. Feedback can, of course, take many forms. To return to the horse study for a moment, they used feedback like through heart rate readings. In other words, feedback may take different shapes, including nonverbal communication, such as gestures or facial expressions, and is not restricted, as Eduardo Kohn shows in his book, How Forests Think. Kohn advocates for decentering the human and invites readers to think in images, to look for meaning in different places, through different perspectives, to again gain a full understanding of what we might call our world. He talks about trans-species pigeon, which he calls a kind of communication that's usually reserved for when we communicating with somebody deemed intellectually inferior, so a child or the dog. He also talks about behaviors linked to colonialism. An example he provides is in Ecuador, apparently one is supposed to look the panther in the eye to show dominance and discourage the panther from attacking. This desire for dominance is also present in equestrian sports, and while many speak of their equine partner, actions sometimes speak louder than words. Many practices on the ground and in the saddle rely on the horse's flight instinct, and this discomfort or negative reinforcement is used as the basis of communication. That's not necessarily what classical riding traditions promote, at least on paper. So, for example, Egon von Neindorf comments in How to Position the Leg that it should breathe with the horse, meaning there should be basically no pressure. So rather than creating pressure, he teaches about teaches contact without pressure, though pressure also is used through the seat very minimally to communicate. So when we look at meaning making in the context of care, looking at it from the different perspectives can really help gain a better understanding. Let's look at another example. Lindsay Marshall uses the story of a private who lost his life during the Battle of 𝗔𝗯𝘀𝘁𝗿 to illustrate how horse-centered thinking can change perspective and understanding of an event. She learned about the story of the private who was unable to stop his horse from walking into enemy lines. In the two places where she found the story mentioned, the horse was blamed for what transpired. However, in providing additional information about training methods and horsemanship practices, a different story emerges. Lack of training of the recruits and Custer's belief that rider and horse combinations were interchangeable likely contributed to the events. The story represents the inclusion of different perspectives that Haraway and Harding advocate for. It also includes the importance of effective communication in a care-based relationship that Tronto and Bella-Casa describe. It also includes the disruption of human exceptionalism that Kohn envisions, and it includes the practice of care in interspecies communication that von Nientorf teaches. Next, let's look at care and language and how varying perceptions can impact that. So, Janet Jones combines her love for horses with her field of neuroscience to explain the differences between human and equine or horse meaning making. So, for example, horses have almost surround view, though they cannot see behind themselves, and they do have to turn their heads if they want to see directly behind themselves. Things are also not very focused. They will notice movement but are not necessarily able to discern what they see. Their excellent sense of smell will help them fill in the pieces, like they can identify herd members or threats. In addition, their eyes take a long time to adjust to dark spaces, such as barns or trailers. When a horse stops to look at something, sometimes riders become worried, and often they try to restrain the horse from turning its head, which the horse, of course, must do to see behind themselves. They being the horses, may also smell something that we as humans are not aware of, making their behavior seem irrational to us. Then the unruly horse from the Battle of 𝗔𝗯𝘀𝘁𝗿 may have had other stimuli the reader and observers were unaware of. These different perceptions are important to note when thinking about interspecies communication, and careful, as in full of care, interactions based on trust are warranted for the safety of both human and non-human. So I'm going to use a personal story here to kind of illustrate this a little bit more. Several years ago, our son participated in a summer camp with our Haflinger Pie, pictured here. One afternoon, the barn owner paired the riders in teams of 2, and they were asked to sack hop while also leading horse. Our son's human partner lost his balance and tripped, and he fell in front of their equine partner, who then also lost his balance and now fell on top of the boy or his leg. Attendants were close by, and they tried to get the horse up so they could, get the kid out, but the horse wouldn't budge. Instead, he just remained on top of the child's leg. Pie did not move until the owner joined the scene, and once he trusted her, so she was able to get him up. Once they had him up a little bit and were able to pull the kid out, what turned out was that Pie had been on his front legs the whole time to avoid putting any pressure on the child's leg, and neither one of them was hurt. Pi did not know the other child well, and even though he knew our son well, he was really young, and I don't think he thought that he could handle that situation. However, he had been to these summer camps for several years and knew the barn owner well. We will, of course, never know what exactly went through his mind, but the fact that he remained in a position of discomfort rather than trying to scramble to his feet can be interpreted as intentionality. In the context of semiotics, each species has its own signs and interpretants, and successful interspecies communication relies on one or both parties to find ways to create shared meaning. We might see a horse atop a person, which leads us to interpret the situation based on our existing knowledge. This knowledge will vary based on experiences, an important element in interspecies communication. From our perspective, a horse atop a human is a threat to the well-being of the horse. For the horse, based on his experience, this might be an event for which he will be punished, or he feels vulnerable because he's on the ground. These differences may result in unexpected reactions, but they can be mitigated through the care to create shared meaning, such as the socialization mentioned earlier, and rather than being considered a chain of actions, these actions themselves can become the medium of communication in the absence of a shared language. This just is, if we look at what happened through the lens of the semiotic circle, then we can see here that we have an object, we have the representation, and then the interpretation. And then, of course, the interpretation becomes, again, in this context, the next object to be interpreted, and so forth. We can also see that there's elements of care, both from the humans and from the equine. And so actions of care are intertwined in this throughout. Which brings us to resonance. These are, of course, recollections, so resonance is built on experiences, it's built on emotional responses. Here's again the definition from the call for proposals. Another definition is resonance is a relationship of response when a subject is affected by the world, perceives its otherness and uniqueness, and undergoes transformation through affection, self-efficacy, and adaptation. This definition is by Hartmut Rosa. So while offering slightly different foci, both definitions reference emotional memory with regard to experiences. The first definition references personal images, which reminds of Kuhn's advocacy to think in images. The second definition references affection, self-efficacy, and adaptation, which find alignment with Toronto's last two phases of care. Since resonance is linked closely to emotions in response to experience, resonance is also a response to care, maybe the absence of it or the presence. Negative experiences characterized by an absence of care may, or maybe the presence of self-care, create their own resonances. Kelly Oliver proposes that in humans' effort to distinguish themselves from animals, the animals have become our teachers. She calls this animal pedagogy. However, our relationships, at least with some animals, have changed significantly. Many consider dogs and cats to be family members, and horses are joining these ranks as well. This shift in our relationships requires a shift in communication, which impacts shared experiences. Our non-human companions share our living spaces and observe our actions and interactions. Few of them are what Fugaza would call gifted, but communication takes place nonetheless, and the more effective and careful the communication, the more often moments of positive resonance emerge. With the well-being of these non-human companions relying on care and resonance, fostering both is essential. If resonance is connected to care and care can be a form of representation, how then does resonance integrate into the semiotic circle? Resonance from previous experiences might impact interpretation of objects and representations, and resonance can become a sign in its own right. If we look at the example of the horse and child one more time, the event resonated with the stable owner and me because we were proud of Pi's actions. The experience might have resonated a bit differently with the child trapped under the horse. As for the horse, he might not be so eager to be led by two kids hopping next to him, and he might refuse to move. Through resonance, these careful actions influence future interpretations. To conclude, let's look again at the hypotheses. The first one was considering care as a language and a medium repositions it as a form of communication rather than an activity. If actions can be a representation of meaning, and actions of care transcend language barriers and barriers of interspecies communication and meaning making, then care can be considered, under those circumstances, a language or a medium to convey meaning. The second hypothesis, disentangling verbal and nonverbal communication of care, allows for a more in-depth understanding of resonance. Resonance derives from experiences which are linked to emotional responses. While resonance is shared through the representation of language, the emotions connected to resonance are nonverbal representations. And nonverbal interspecies careful communication can then help to disentangle the verbal from the nonverbal, thus fostering a deeper understanding of resonance. Thank you for your time. For those of you wondering what is on the remaining slides, those are the reference pages, and I will show them briefly so that if somebody's interested, you can just pause and look at it more closely. Thanks again.